Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the MoeGamer podcast. I'm Pete Davison from MoeGamer.net, and as always I'm joined by my good friend Chris Kasky from MrGilderPixels.com. Hey Chris, how you doing?
Good, Pete. How are you today?
I'm cold, but
yeah. Are you guys getting rocked by this business too? This polar vortex business?
Well, rocked is a bit relative when we talk about what is actually happening to the States in terms of temperature. Like, we're getting down to like -2 and -3, and we're like, whoa, it's the end of the world. And then we got friends in the States who send us screenshots of like, oh, hey, where we are, it's -20.
Yeah. I was talking to my ex-wife. She lives in Toronto, and she said it was -22 on Wednesday.
It's crazy. There's certain areas just seem to go by extremes. Like my brother used to live in Chicago, and that was really nice in the summer and an absolutely nightmarish apocalyptic hellscape in winter.
Oh yeah, Chicago's quite bad right now. I think there's actually a state of emergency or something. Yeah. Like, you're not supposed to go outside. It's like, I heard like instant frostbite is a threat or something. Like, if you're not covered up.
Yeah, it puts it in perspective when I complain about having to scrape my car in the morning, at least. We did get some snow the other day. Not quite enough to get us off work, unfortunately, but we did have a little bit of snow for a few hours, and then it stopped, and it was very, very British weather. It just sort of went, eh.
Neither hot nor serious. Cold.
Yeah.
Just lukewarm.
Yeah, pretty much. All right. We've got a hopefully great episode for you today in which we say death to Metroidvania. More on that later. First of all, before that, we're going to use our usual first couple of segments in which we're going to talk about the news first. Then we'll take a short break, talk a little bit about what we've been playing recently, and then move on to that main topic. So consider that a teaser. So, as far as news goes, I just wanted to start with some stuff that is actually going on right now as we are recording this, which is the Final Fantasy XIV FanFest. There is a whole bunch of news coming out about that. And as always, Nova Crystallis, the fan site and Twitter account, has got a ton of information on it. So I'm pulling most of my information from there. So if you want to find out more, they've got a really good write-up and summary of what's happening. So basically, the FanFest, if you're unfamiliar, is an event that goes on a few times a year in different places around the globe. I think they do one in America, one in Europe, one in Japan each year. And generally, those are the places where they tend to reveal new details about the upcoming expansions and patches and such like. And so with the new expansion Shadowbringers coming along later this year, this is sort of the first real concrete details we're getting on the, what are we on? The third expansion now, Shadowbringers. So,
first of all... already been two.
Yeah. So Shadowbringers is coming out on July the 2nd. They've confirmed the release date now. There will be an early access period, as usual, for people who pre-order. Pre-orders for it will begin on February the 6th. So in a few days' time, or shortly after you hear this, you should be able to pre-order it. And that will guarantee you early access, as well as the usual few in-game goodies as well, like minions and stuff like that. So the details for the expansion that have been revealed so far, they're bringing in one new job, which is a new tank class called Gunbreaker, and they wield Final Fantasy VIII style gunblades.
Yeah, this looks really cool. This would make me want a tank finally. Normally I'm like averse to tank classes, but this looks cool as hell. Yeah.
So at the moment, Final Fantasy XIV has got 3 tank classes. It's got Paladin, which is very much sort of mitigating damage as much as possible. You've got Warrior, which is sort of maintaining aggro by doing a decent amount of damage and having a lot of hit points. And you've got Dark Knight, which is sort of kind of somewhere in between. I haven't played Dark Knight since they revamped it for Stormblood, but certainly in Heavensward when it was introduced, it sort of had like a lot of status effects and damage over time and that sort of thing. So it was quite a complex class to play, but it was a really satisfying one when you got it right. So Gunbreaker. There are gunblades in Final Fantasy XIV already for the enemies, like the Garlean Empire, who are sort of one of the main antagonistic forces in the game. They've been using gunblades for quite a while at this point, but they specifically pointed out that the Gunbreaker's gunblade is slightly different to those, and they're specifically designed to be like Squalls in Final Fantasy VIII. It will start at level 60 and has no associated class, so you don't need to level it right from 1. That seems to be the pattern they're going with most of the new classes at this point, aside from Blue Mage, which is a special case. Their main resources, they use magicked ammunition that enhances the damage, and so the main resource they spend is these different types of ammunition that will do different things, presumably. And you can play through the whole of the expansion as Gunbreaker if you want to, but obviously you'll have to get it from 60 to 70 before you'll be able to start that. So, a bit of grinding before you do that. Beyond that, they've revealed a couple of new areas. There is the Raktika Greatwood, which is a new foresty area. Unlike the previous foresty areas around Gridania, which was in the original Realm Reborn, you can fly in this one, and you fly under the tree canopy. It's like a really huge forest that the actual canopy of the trees is so high up you can actually fly underneath it.
Oh, that sounds really neat.
And then there's Ilmeg, which is the Realm of Pixies, which is a very sort of fantasy-themed area. Kind of looks like it's taken a bit of sort of almost Tolkien ideas from it, looking at sort of the sort of houses for the pixies that are built into the sides of hills and stuff like that, and lots of arches and curved lines and that sort of thing. So that looks really cool. Apparently they've come up with a whole new language for the pixies as well, called Fae. So that should be interesting to find out. Other stuff, they're putting in a trust system, which is a bit different to Final Fantasy XI. In Final Fantasy XI, what you could do is you could basically collect NPCs in a sort of collectible catalog type thing, and then you could recruit those NPCs to play alongside you. It was basically a means of allowing people to still play the game while the player count was sort of dwindling off and tailing off, because they finished doing sort of active updates to Final Fantasy XI now, but people still obviously want to play the content. So by having computer controlled characters in there through this trust system, it allows people to do that. In 14, the trust system is mainly geared at the story dungeons for the new expansion. And so you'll be able to party with characters like Thancred and Ishtola and Minfilia to challenge the Shadowbringers story dungeons, which is one interesting possible solution to the issue that Final Fantasy XIV story dungeons have always had, which is people want to rush through them, they want to skip the cutscenes, all that sort of thing. So if you do it with the actual characters of the game rather than other players, then you don't have to worry about that because you're just fighting alongside them. So as long as they get the AI right, that should be pretty cool.
Can we please port this back to the entire game to the very beginning so I can go and enjoy Final Fantasy XIV's story like it's a single-player game? Because I desire this greatly.
They're experimenting with a few things. There's already a system in place called Squadrons, where you can sort of level up a bunch of recruitable characters. These are just sort of random NPCs rather than story NPCs, and you can already run some dungeons with them. Not all of them, I don't think, but some dungeons you can certainly run with them. But I have a feeling you actually have to get to at least level 50 before you can start doing that, I think. I haven't looked into it for a while, but yeah, it would be good if they brought this back throughout the rest of the game, and perhaps they will. So if this ends up working well for Shadowbringers, they may well bring it back through the rest of the game. Alongside that, another interesting bit of news is they're adding a New Game Plus mode. Which is not something I've seen an MMO do before. But what this means is that you can replay the whole main story, all your job quests, all of the you'd call them post-game quests in a normal RPG, but sort of after the conclusion of the base game story in the various expansions. So you'll be able to take your current level, your current gear, and go back and replay all this stuff and basically wipe the floor with everything. So that should be quite fun. Which in theory means that if you've forgotten how the story goes, you can go back to the beginning with your super buff item level 380 character or whatever and just play through and enjoy the story. But you will have to have done it once already to enjoy that, if you see what I mean. A couple of other bits of news. They are finally adding Viera as a playable race, which has been requested for a long time. Teased in the last couple of raids in which Fran from Final Fantasy XII put in an appearance in cutscenes. I
just watched the video. I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
I am pro Viera.
Yeah. So
to say the least.
So the Viera, their starting gear is basically Fran's outfit, and then from there, presumably they'll have all the different types of gear available to them. But yeah, their starting outfit is just Fran's gear. So you if you want to run around the whole game dressed as Fran, you'll be able to use the glamour system to do that. Also, the next 24-player raid is going to be Nier themed. You still there?
I am.
Was that just stunned silence?
No, I just don't care about raids. So it's like you basically just said, "Here's cool content that you won't have fun experiencing anyway." So
yeah, well, the 24-player raids are the more sort of casual side of raids, in that you've got so many people there that it doesn't matter so much if you're not playing absolutely perfectly. It's just designed to be large-scale content, so it's sensible that they've done this as the 24-player ones rather than the 8-player ones. It seems that they pretty much from the beginning they've been wanting to make the 24-player raids as the sort of main way that they reference other games, because the Realm Reborn ones all reference Final Fantasy 3. In Heaven's Ward, they were... What were they in Heaven's Ward? They were... I've completely forgotten. What was it? Oh well, obviously they left a huge impact on me. And then the most recent ones have been Evilis. So you've been going through sort of various Final Fantasy 12 and Final Fantasy Tactics locales. So they are on the more accessible, casual side, but obviously you do still have to play alongside other people. But yeah, the new 24-player raid cycle is called Yorha Dark Apocalypse. It's being handled by Yosuke Saito and Yoko Taro, both of who are sort of key players in both Nier and Dragon Quest X. They've both worked on, or I think Saito's worked on Dragon Quest X and so on. The promotional artwork makes it look like 2P, which is the alternate color scheme from Soul Calibur, is sort of taking a leading role. 2B sort of in the background of the promotional art, and 2P is in the foreground, which is interesting. Presumably there will be Nier-themed gear as drops from this as well, which will be neat. So yeah, that's getting people quite excited and hot and bothered at the minute. And I think that's pretty much it at the time of recording. As I say, as we're recording this, the FanFest and the various conferences are still going on. So do check on novacrystallis.com for the very latest. They've got all the trailers and screenshots and stuff there. So that's a great place to find out a bit more. But yeah, don't know if all this is enough to tempt me back at the moment, but it's certainly sounding very interesting. Again, they're getting a bit experimental and trying some new things, which is good, rather than settling into a rhythm of doing the same thing each time, which has always been a real strength of Yoshida and his team. But yeah, looking quite exciting for now. And even if I don't play it myself, I'll probably get to experience it vicariously via my wife, who is still playing very actively. So, all right, enough of that. What have you got on the docket for us today?
Oh, let's see here. Well, I did notice that we got a couple more tidbits of information about that new Imageepoch game that might be coming around.
Yes.
Mainly that there's going to be an official reveal of the title on February 9th, so that's coming up relatively soon.
Yep.
Next Saturday, to be exact. And there's kind of been some leaks of information in that apparently it's going to be a VR title.
Oh, that's interesting.
And thematically, the two important things to the game are cats and motorcycles.
Okay.
I don't know if the cats are on the motorcycles, but cats and motorcycles. So we will see what the old Imageepoch folks have in store for us involving cats and motorcycles on February 9th.
Yeah.
So keep an eye open.
It looks like they're quite keen to do an English version as well. Like from the start of development, they're quite keen to get a Western version out as well, which is good.
Yeah, well, I think after there was so much backlash back in the day because we never got. I keep wanting to say Stella Glow, but that's the one we did get. Oh, no, I can't remember the name of the series. There's a series of three strategy RPGs they did. The name of which is escaping me right now. And we got 1 and 2 in the West, but never 3.
Oh, okay.
And ever since that happened, there's kind of been a big, the Imageepoch fan community has always been pretty pretty vocal. So we did manage to get Stella Glow, which was kind of a spiritual successor to that series, which was great. And we have gotten a lot of their stuff in the past, so I usually kind of take it as a given. I mean, we did even get Time and Eternity, and that was the most Japanese game possible.
Yes, and everyone hated it except me.
Yeah, I like it too. I just didn't play it all the way through, but I thought it was really neat. What else? I guess, the big news for us, right? Trails of Cold Steel 3 getting localized, finally.
Yes. So as a lot of people expected, this is coming via North America rather than Xseed. However, they did reveal at what was it, PAX South, the most recent one, I think. I think so. They did a big panel there to discuss this and sort of lay a few concerns to rest. So they've brought on board a bunch of people from who are formerly from Xseed to help with the translation. One of those was Hatsu, Brittany Avery, but unfortunately she's had to step down due to ill health and apparently the Curse of the Trail series, which seems to affect at least one person on the development team every game. So yeah, that's a real shame, because Trails has always been her baby in the West. So it's a real shame that she's not going to be able to contribute to it as much as she wanted to. She's not ruling out a bit of work on it, but she's had to step down from sort of the active role she was originally intending to play, which is a bit of a shame. But there are some other former Xseeders and people who've worked on the series in the past still working on it as well. So chances are it's going to be they're serious about doing this properly. So anyone who still has worries after Ys 8, just wait and see what happens. I think they know what they're doing. So yeah. What else we got?
Giga Wrecker. A couple months ago in a previous episode, we had talked a little bit about Game Freak. They had a game called Giga Wrecker.
Oh yes.
Which was it was on Steam. I think it is available currently on Steam. And they have now announced Giga Wrecker Alt, which is for consoles. So PS4, Xbox One, and Switch are getting this new fully enhanced version of Giga Wrecker, which is once again by Game Freak, which are the Pokemon people. But this is a title they've developed kind of outside of Nintendo, outside of Pokemon, and it's just a really interesting looking side scroller with a lot of exploration and physics heavy gameplay, where you can kind of just destroy the entire environment and let it tumble around you. Looks like a lot of fun. It looks like Rising Star is going to be involved, and Limited Run has already been signed on to do a physical pressing of the PS4 and Switch versions. Mm-hmm. So this is definitely one to keep an eye out for. I really like Game Freak as a developer, and that's not just coming from a position as a Pokemon fan, but like their earlier stuff is really cool too. Shockman, or what was the name? Pulse Man? They made a game for the Mega Drive. It was an incredible side scroller, and it never came west, but it was really, really good. They had a really interesting game on the Super Nintendo as well, which was a side scroller, but it also had like turn-based combat.
Okay.
I'm having trouble thinking of names of games today for some reason. But Game Freak has a really interesting history of really unique games with interesting mechanical wrinkles. There's more to them than just Pokemon. So I'm really, really keen to get my hands on this. I'll definitely be ponying up for that physical copy on the Switch for sure.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good. And yeah, I bet they're eager for the opportunity to spread their wings a bit as well.
Oh yeah.
Okay, other stuff. We got Idea Factory International has announced that Moero Chronicle Hyper, which is the revamped version of Moe Chronicle, that they were porting to Switch, that is coming west in spring of this year. It's going to be digital only, which is a bit of a shame, but it is coming west to Switch, which is nice. Not a huge amount to say about that, but yeah, it's just good news that they sort of did that before anyone asked for it, really, which is nice. I haven't actually played the Vita version yet, but I know a lot of people who really enjoyed that, so it'll be good to sort of broaden the audience for that a bit without having to import it from PlayAsia or somewhere. Actually having an official Western version. will be good.
I was just saying, I'm not necessarily convinced that a physical version might not happen eventually. A lot of these limited press houses end up signing on with these people after the digital version's been around for a while. So
yeah. And I mean, Idea Factory is sort of very open to the idea of collaborating with other people, because they did that recent port of Fairy Fencer F to Switch in collaboration with Ghostlight. Again, that didn't have a physical release, but yeah, there's nothing ruling out that possibility of them working with other people, and so that would be good to see in the future. But for now, the plan is to release it digitally in spring 2019. So, other news: Nintendo announced that they are completely scrapping what they've done on Metroid Prime 4, starting again and getting Retro Studios involved this time. So, this was pretty significant, really, because it's a sign that Nintendo really wants to get this right. And I mean, one might question why they didn't bring on Retro Studios in the first place if they wanted to make sure of that, but I don't know. It's difficult to wonder what the exact situation with that would be, but presumably what was already in the pipeline wasn't good enough, or what they expected, or something like that. So it's pretty significant for a whole game to be restarted after it's been worked on and teased several times. So yeah, that obviously means it's going to be a bit later than it was originally expected, but I think that was always going to be one of those games that was going to be it'll be out when it's done sort of situation. So
yeah, well, as the great Miyamoto said, a delayed game is only delayed for a little while, but a bad game is bad forever. So
yes, absolutely. So in the meantime, people are hoping that there's going to be a Metroid Prime collection for Switch. So no news one way or the other on that at the moment. But yeah,
they'd be crazy not to.
They would be absolutely crazy not to, because they know there's demand for it. People will buy it, and yeah, the Switch is
certainly would.
A good platform for it as well. So other Nintendo news, they've said that they've given a really vague teaser of an announcement, which is that they're announcing something that's going to make a lot of people very happy, apparently.
I saw that. and suited for the online multiplayer, I think they mentioned too.
Yes.
It's going to be network suitable, or whatever, however they phrased that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of conjecture going around about that. I mean, they make a lot of people very happy. Everyone is, of course, jumping straight to Mother 3. But that doesn't really fit with the online thing as well. So the other possibility there is something like F-Zero.
That's where my brain went immediately. Because everyone's been clamoring for a new F-Zero forever, and what would suit network play better than a great racer?
Yeah. So we don't know what's going to happen with that yet, but they have teased that. So that obviously they've whipped everyone up into a frenzy over that, but it'll be a while before we find out what is going on there. Okay, anything else you want to bring up?
Just that, we talked about Dragon Marked for Death last week, on our last episode. Currently available digitally. It's getting some really good press. Apparently it's quite good. And we do now have a release date locked down for the physical copy, which, as we talked about in the previous episode, the digital version, you have to make a choice and buy one of two packages that includes 2 of the 4 characters, and then make a choice to buy the other characters as DLC.
Yes.
If you're patient and you wait for the physical version, which is more money, obviously, but it is all 4 characters as well as a season pass for all the DLC, as has been kind of a popular method on the Switch lately, and that's coming March 26th.
Yes.
In the West.
Yes, and it says that's for North America and Europe.
Yep.
So last time I checked, there was no means of pre-ordering the European version yet, but hopefully that will come along soon. Who is it that's publishing it? It's Nighthawk, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it's the same people who did Azure Striker Gunvolt.
Yeah. So I mean that didn't have any problems with getting distributed in Europe. So yeah, hopefully that will show up in a week or two. So, anything else?
I don't think so. You had posted something about Outrun, the Sega Ages.
Oh yes. I can't remember why I posted that. Let me just have a look.
Well, Outrun is available on the Switch now.
Yeah, Outrun is available now. I think. This was an interview posted by a site called Gear Nuke. Oh yes, I remember what it was now. Yeah, this interview by this site Gearnuke, who I've not heard of before, but they posted quite a good interview with Yosuke Okunari, and the probably the most interesting thing to come out of it was the fact that they were interested in localizing titles that haven't previously been translated.
Oh.
So that's quite exciting. So Okunari cites the example of Monster World 4 for the Sega Vintage Collection 3, which hadn't previously been released outside of Japan. And his quote was, "This title ended up with translation quality which wouldn't have been possible to have back in 1994 when this game first released. In the future, we may try localizing titles which had never been translated if we can draw a reaction." So
consider a reaction drawn.
Yeah, so if you want something, make sure you say so, basically, because that could give us all sorts of interesting stuff coming west for the first time. These Sega Ages ports are pretty cool from what I've seen. I picked up the Thunder Force 4 one recently, which is a reasonably straightforward port of Thunder Force 4 from the Mega Drive, but I mean it works really nicely on Switch. It plays well. The Phantasy Star port is really good because it's got some nice quality of life features in there, like the auto map and being able to display your stats on screen all the time, as well as navigating through the dungeons. Outrun's supposed to be good, even if it does lack the tilty cabinet mode from the 3DS version, which I'm quite sad about. I think there's a version of Sonic as well. Not sure what they've done with that specifically, but it seems to have been quite well received as well. So looks like they're serious about bringing us some stuff that we haven't seen before, which is very exciting.
That. Rent-A-Hero, the Mega Drive version of Rent-A-Hero.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, so that's all good. All right, I think we've probably covered all the things we want to talk about there for now. So let's take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk about what we've been playing recently. So, see you in a moment. Welcome back. For our second segment, we'd like to talk about what we've been playing recently. So, what have you been playing recently, Chris?
It's going to be a short one for me. I haven't really been playing anything new that I haven't already talked about. Just still diving deep into Fist of the North Star, Lost Paradise, and I've been kind of... a new season started on Diablo 3, so I've been playing a lot of Diablo 3 again.
Yep.
But the first new thing that I haven't really talked about on the cast yet is Gunhouse for the Vita.
Yes, you were very enthusiastic about this, so please infuse away.
Yeah, so Gunhouse is a really weird puzzle game by Necrosoft Games. Now, the only thing I'd ever played by Necrosoft before is a game called Oh Dear, which is... it's available, I think, as a PlayStation Mini, back when those were a thing. I don't even think you can get it anymore. Maybe it's available on cell phone. But Oh Dear was essentially a riff on like the classic like 16-bit driving games like Outrun and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember hating it as well.
Yeah, I remember. And you're in a station wagon, and the whole idea is just like you have to get to grandma's house, and there's just deer in the road, and like hitting the deer adds to your time or whatever. And it was noteworthy because they got the composer for Streets of Rage 3.
Yeah.
Who is not the guy who did Streets of Rage 1 and 2, but he's a different composer. But it was noteworthy because they got kind of this classic 16-bit composer guy to do original music for it. And so there was a kind of a big hullabaloo about it. And they're kind of an interesting developer because all their stuff kind of is just irreverent. It has kind of an interesting visual feel. From a design standpoint, they really favor this kind of muted color palette. So all their games have kind of a very distinct and like instantly identifiable look. So Gunhouse is kind of their take on a classic drop puzzle game. It is available on mobile phone, which I think is where it started initially. You can get it on the Vita, PS4, and the Switch. I have it on the Vita because I ended up getting the physical version from Limited Run a while ago. So the basic idea behind it is it's a hybrid of certain tower defense mechanics with a drop puzzle game. So the puzzle section is on the right side of the screen. There's a kind of a physics wrinkle to it in that the blocks always are filling the screen. So you can't lose. It's not like a block puzzler like Tetris where you lose if the screen fills. The actual puzzle is always full, and when you match blocks and make them go away, it just fills again. It drops from the top.
Right. So sort of Bejeweled style.
Yeah. So what you have to do is Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo style. The idea is to match blocks up in blocks of 4, 6, 8, whatever even number, and then if you do that, they'll combine into one large block. Then what happens is you either swipe that block to the left if you can, or the right if you can. If you swap that block to the left, that block becomes a gun, a turret on the left side of your house. If you swipe that block to the right, it becomes a special move that you can deploy. And the game works in cycles. So you get, I believe it's 20 seconds to work on the puzzle, and then your house closes up, and then there's a wave of enemies. And then you have to fire the guns and deploy the special moves that you've saved up by making the puzzle blocks match to destroy the bad guys that are trying to attack the house. So you go back and forth between doing this. The larger the blocks you make, the better the guns you make. If you make one gun, and then if you can keep making blocks of the same color, you can hammer more ammo into that gun during that round, making that gun more effective for the next wave of enemies.
Yeah.
Then at the top of the screen, there's a section that shows what type of color they'd like you to match for an immediate bonus. So you can do whatever you want, but if you match the one they're specifically asking for, that gun will be twice as powerful as if you were doing just whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a storefront. Enemies drop money, so you can buy new guns, you can upgrade your guns, upgrade your health and shields. And it basically just goes on infinitely. Like, you can just keep playing, and it just keeps generating new levels, new waves for you. And all the guns are like goofy. So, like, one gun shoots like carrots, and one gun shoots like skulls that like bite the bad guys and explode. And they all have radically different effects. So, like, one gun shoots boomerangs. The gun that shoots skulls that I just mentioned, it does damage, but in a delayed fashion. So, like, the skulls that shoot out of the gun don't actually do damage until they explode. So the skulls shoot out, chomp onto the enemies to slow them down for a little bit, and then explode. So it's all about experimenting with, like, the different effects of the different guns, and kind of seeing what method works right for you. And, you know, there's also objectives that the game will throw at you that you can try to complete for bonus money for the shop, and trophies if you're playing on a platform with achievements or whatever. So it'll be like, use the dragon gun to kill 5 enemies in 1 round or something. And you can also try to aim to satisfy these objectives to help you progress with money in the shop faster. I love this game, like obsessively. I pretty much just play it before work every morning for like 15 minutes, but it's just super addictive. It's just
really cool.
It's a good puzzler. It really is. The music is really catchy. The designs are just so different because, once again, Necrosoft has a really kind of different approach to character design and color palette. So it doesn't really look like anything I've ever played before, which is part of the reason I'm enjoying it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just great. It's a really cool fusion of 2 interesting genres, and it plays well. You know, classic, easy to pick up, hard to master gameplay, which is usually the most addictive formula.
Yeah, definitely. This was the one I thought it was. This is the one with this sort of, it's almost like a sort of pastel-y colour scheme, isn't it? So it gives it a very distinctive look to it.
Yeah.
But it's it looks really nice. And that just sounds like a really weird combination of mechanics that works really nicely. So I'll have to have a look at that. It's caught my eye a couple of times. I think the logo looks like something else that I like.
Okay.
But I can't remember what it is. So it's caught my eye for that reason a few times, and I've seen the graphics and I thought, that looks cool.
It would be perfect to have on the Switch. It really would.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll have to check that out. Is that all you've been playing recently then, aside from Diablo and what was the other one?
Yeah. Well, Fist of the North Star for sure.
Fist of the North Star, that's it, yeah.
Which has been fun because I've gotten to the point now where I have access to the hostess and club management minigame.
Ah, yes.
Me being a Yakuza
the true Yakuza game starts here.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said in a prior episode, I've never really gotten into a Yakuza game before, so I've never experienced like the hostess managing mini game, and I had no idea that it was kind of a bit of a puzzle game in disguise. So I guess I don't know how it works in other games, but in Fist of the North Star, it's kind of an active real-time thing where you kind of have a bird's eye view of the club, and the guys come in, they sit down. The guys have their preferences, like, do you like a cute girl, a beautiful girl, a strong girl? I think there's one other one. And you have your hostesses with their stats. You have to pay attention to whether or not they're tired from working or not, and then match them up with the appropriate guys. And this all happens in real time, so you've got to like reactively being like assigning these girls, watching their energy levels. It gets kind of hectic, but it's really addictive.
The hostess stuff is kind of interesting because they've kind of developed and iterated on that and done it slightly differently in all of the Yakuza games. Because in the original one, it was basically just a dating sim. You weren't actually running the club. You were just going in and meeting girls. And you had to say the right things to them to build up their affection meter, and then you get text messages from them, and that would lead to side quests and that sort of thing. But as the series has gone on, that side of things proved to be so popular with people that they've just continued to build on it with each new installment. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that they've gone quite so far with it in Fist of the North Star, definitely. But yeah, it's always a very popular part of those games. So glad to hear that they've incorporated that into a spin-off. So
yeah, it's really cool. I haven't gotten too far into it because I didn't know this was kind of a regular part of these the Yakuza games and now Fist of the North Star, but I didn't realize that it's pretty standard for there to just be an open world version. Like once you beat the game, you can just be free to enjoy the side content. So once I found out that was a thing, I'm just pretty intent on hammering out the story. Yeah. And then I'll go back to do all this crazy stuff. Yes. But it's great to drive around the desert in your dune buggy looking for new hostesses for your
while listening to Super Monkey Ball, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That has always been a thing in Yakuza. So the side stories have always been sort of almost as much of an attraction as the main story in a lot of cases. So they put that mode in there specifically so that you could enjoy the side stories without feeling like you're leaving the main story hanging. And there's always so much to do that isn't necessarily sort of side quests even. Like Yakuza 3 had an incredibly in-depth Mahjong simulation in there that a lot of people spent a lot of time on, if you ever understand Mahjong, which I do not.
I have friends who do, and they keep promising that they're going to show me how to play, but I'm terrified of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a terrifying game. I do not understand it in the slightest. Yakuza 3 actually has some quite good documentation on it that explains it, but I read all of that, and I was still like, I still have no idea how to play this game. Oh, yes. So I will revisit those games at some point. I have most of them on my shelf at this point, so I'm waiting to see those PS4 remakes of the later ones to come out. Yeah, because Yakuza 5 I think didn't get a physical release here or in America, I don't think. So I'm quite keen to have a copy of that in particular, because I've got all the other ones on either PS3, PS2 or PS4 at the moment. So Yakuza 5 is the only one I don't actually have a disc copy of. So
I really want the one that's sent in ancient Japan. That's the one.
Oh, yes.
That's the one I want the most.
Yeah, well, I mean, you never know these days. I mean, that was always the one game that people thought, oh, no, we'll never get that one. But I think these days we're a lot more likely to actually see that over here, especially because Sega seems pretty switched on to the fact that there is a significant Western fan base for Yakuza now. So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they would be foolish not to do that at this point. So we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. All right. So what have I been playing? I've been playing 3 things mainly. I will start with Ace Combat 7 because I've now finished that, or finished the campaign anyway. There's plenty more you can go back and unlock, and there's a multiplayer mode that I don't have PS Plus at the moment, so I can't try that out. But yeah, so it's very much an Ace Combat game, which everyone is very happy about because the last one to release, Ace Combat Assault Horizon, people complained that it didn't feel enough like Ace Combat. So they're very much back on form, both from a sort of mechanical and narrative perspective. So it's set back in the land of Strange Real, which, as you said to me off mic a while back, is surprising that land is still standing at all with the number of wars it's been through by this point.
It really is. Constant conflict.
Yeah, so at the time of Ace Combat 7, so far, it's been hit by an asteroid. There's a country that blew itself up with nuclear bombs, so they didn't have to deal with anyone else anymore. There have been several wars, including mega weapons designed to shoot down asteroids and satellites. There's a satellite nearly fell on a city. It's just ridiculous. And Ace Combat 7 thoroughly embraces all of that ridiculousness. Because it's the first one for quite a long time, it's quite interesting to see how the kind of in-game technology is advanced. Because Ace Combat 7 is very much a story about modern war and about how technology and automation and stuff can be very dangerous. The cool thing about the Ace Combat series is it's never been a sort of gung-ho macho military action thing. It's always been a very sort of thoughtful story about war.
Yeah, it's a very Japanese approach, really. It's like Metal Gear is the same way. There's no narrative in Metal Gear that's like, war is awesome, be out there, do war. It's always like, you're doing war to end all wars because war is terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Ace Combat has always been, yes, you get to fly these awesome planes, but you are flying those awesome planes because you already have access to those awesome planes, and someone has something that's maybe slightly better and a bit more dangerous than what you've got. So you should probably go and deal with that before they do anything unpleasant with it. So yeah, Ace Combat 7... there's a lot of stuff to do with like automated production and drones and stuff. So like in an early mission, you encounter this flying thing, and the first time it comes up, the music goes all scary, and there's like sort of choirs singing in Latin in the background, and the only thing it says on your head-up display for it is just unknown, and it's terrifying. But it turns out it's this drone, which is this sort of an experimental thing at that point, and as the story advances you start seeing more and more of these things, and there's this giant airborne carrier thing that shoots out drones and has lasers on it, and this massive electromagnetic shield, and yeah, it's insane. It's fantastic. And there's a brilliant sequence towards the end of the game where part of what is going on in the background is so sort of you're flying a mission, and as you're flying that mission, you start seeing little glitches in your plane's head-up display and stuff, and by the end of the mission, you're like, all radio transmissions and electronic devices have just been completely corrupted, because while you were flying this mission, it turns out that both sides in the conflict were trying to shoot down each other's satellites, and succeeded, but they blew up the satellites in such a way that all the debris promptly went and took out most of the communication system for the whole planet, which plunged the whole planet into sort of communication darkness. So you have a really interesting few missions where you're just there with your squadron, and your commanding officer is just like, well, shit, I have no idea what we're doing right now because I can't talk to anyone. And so you have to, you've got these few missions, which is like, well, we should probably try and get here because there's other people we know there. And you get there and it's complete anarchy, and there's people blowing each other up, and yeah, so the the sort of final conflict in that is sort of complete chaos around the world brought about by all this technology and stuff, and it's just a really cool story that is very modern, very It's topical without being preachy about it, which I think is really important. And it just really gets you thinking about sort of modern conflict and modern war and so on. And the actual gameplay is just really, really satisfying as well. It's classic Ace Combat, so it's a blend between sort of more forgiving flight sims and a few realistic dynamics in there. So you can do things like you can do realistic maneuvers in your plane, like you can stall your plane and you can do things after that, and you can do aerobatic maneuvers and such like, but it also doesn't force you to sort of don't turn too hard, because otherwise you might black out, because that's no fun. You want to be doing 90-degree turns inside canyons and stuff while firing 15 missiles at people at once. It's no fun if you don't feel empowered. You can't be reminded of your human weakness. Ace Combat has always been about sort of you sitting in your cockpit and feeling almost invincible. Because, I mean, the one area where it really does not pay any attention to realism whatsoever is in, like, your plane's weapons loadout. So, like, a real plane can carry maybe 2 bombs and 2 missiles. In Ace Combat, your plane is typically armed with about 120 missiles and 64 bombs. So, so you're just out there. Sounds legit. Yeah, you're just out there flinging missiles at all and sundry, and just it's just so satisfying. And there's also a VR mode in there as well, which I've given a try. It's exclusive to PlayStation VR at the moment, so obviously there's no VR on Xbox, but it's exclusive to PSVR for a year, I think. So next year, PC players will be able to play it on Vive and Oculus as well. But at the moment, it's just PSVR. It's really good. Really, really good. Tell me more. Yeah, there's only 3 missions at the moment, but those 3 missions kind of give a good idea. They're pretty representative of the different aspects of the Ace Combat experience. So the first one is sort of a high-altitude dogfight. So you're sort of way up in the clouds and sort of fighting things. And yeah, you can dive down and go near to the ground if you want to, but most of the action is up in the sky. Then the second one is your base is being attacked, so you're taking off while there's stuff exploding around you and things crashing down from the sky and that sort of thing. And then you have to do low-level ground attacks on assault troops that are coming towards your base and so on. So that's very low-level, and it's sort of giving you a real feel of speed, looking out the cockpit and sort of seeing the detail on the ground whizzing past you at high speed. That's really, really convincing. And then the third one is kind of a hybrid. It's mostly focused on air-to-air combat again, but you're flying above a mountain range, so there's lots of flying in and out of the clouds, sort of dipping in and out of cloud cover and using that for stealth and weaving around the mountains and that sort of thing. So yeah, between those 3 missions you get a good idea of all the different ways you can experience it, and just experiencing in VR, it works really, really well. So they've set it up so that the part of the head-up display floats in front of you regardless of which direction you're looking, so you can see how fast you're going and how high you are. Oh, okay. But then the rest of it is projected where it would be in the real aircraft, so things like the pitch ladder showing whether you're pointing up and down and that sort of thing, and the compass, those are actually on the aircraft's head-up display rather than mounted on your helmet. The radar screen isn't floating in the corner of the screen like it is in the regular game. It's actually where it would be in the real aircraft. Same for your weapons loadout and stuff. So you actually have to look around the cockpit and see what's going on and look at your different instruments and so on. I think they've got more instruments that are actually working in the VR cockpits than they have in the main game as well. So like you can look at your analog instruments and they're all working and stuff as well. So yeah, it's really cool, and it feels very much like you're sitting in that cockpit, which is sort of been a lifelong dream of mine, to sit in the cockpit of something like an F-18 Hornet and something like that. And this is the closest I'm ever going to get to it, but it's very convincing and very, very enjoyable. That's awesome. So when you play regular Ace Combat, I mean, obviously you have to play the VR mode in first person, but do you play first person cockpit view, or do you play like the third person behind the plane? No, I play in first person cockpit view in the standard game as well. I've kind of gone back and forth a bit on this over the course of the different installments. So I think Ace Combat 4 and 5 on PS2, there's a first-person mode that doesn't have the cockpit there, so it's just your head-up display and the view outside. Mm-hmm. And on the PS2 games, because of the resolution, it was a bit easier to play that way. But because we've got such high resolution on the PS4, you can very practically play with the cockpit in front of you now. And it just gives each plane a nicely different feel as well, because all of these cockpits have been modelled really, really lovingly. And
oh, that's so cool.
It just means that each plane you've got just feels very different, just to look at. I mean, I don't know enough about aerodynamics to sort of talk about how differently they handle, really, but certainly it's just sitting in a different cockpit and having different instruments in front of you and different canopy struts around you makes it feel like you've unlocked something worthwhile in you when you get to try something new.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really cool. I'm in the process of writing up a series of articles on that on MoeGamer at the moment, so feel free to read those if you want to find out a bit more. Second thing I've been playing is Dynasty Warriors 8 Extreme Legends Definitive Edition, which is the recent Switch release of Dynasty Warriors 8, which includes the Extreme Legends expansion and includes all the DLC that was released for both the base game and the expansion. So, it is the definitive edition aside from not having a physical version, which is a shame, but, you know. It's also an old game, so I understand. It's really fun, really, really super fun. Having a lot of enjoyable times with it. It's very interesting to compare and contrast with Warriors of Orochi, which I'm playing for my video series at the minute. So, Warriors of Orochi is a fairly bare bones, no frills experience, whereas Dynasty Warriors 8 is very much sort of in the Hyrule Warriors mold, in that there is so much content there. It will take you ages to get through it. Currently, I'm just playing the story mode. I think the meat of the game for a lot of people is in this mode called Ambition mode.
So what is this? I watched a trailer, and they were, for the new edition you're playing, and they were like, expanded Ambition mode. And I'm like, oh, I bet it was big enough in the first place.
So in Ambition mode, what you're doing is you're basically trying to build a town and a temple. And the ultimate goal of it is to basically make something so awesome that the Emperor comes to visit you and goes, "Good job." But you go about doing that by participating in various battles, and the different types of battles you do will provide you with different things. So some will provide you with resources that will let you build new stuff. Some will let you sort of conquer areas and bring people into your town. And other ones will be for sort of recruiting additional officers that you can then have as your bodyguards. So
it's like Atelier Moero, but with murder instead of making things for nice people.
Let's go with that. I haven't really dipped into that yet, but I know that is a substantial one, and there's a significant part of the game that you just don't experience at all if you don't try Ambition mode. So, like, when you're playing story mode, it's very much each episode of the story you have a particular set of characters, and it's a very self-contained experience for each of these chapters, which is cool, because that's probably actually the quickest way to play in this one outside of the challenge modes, in that it just gives you everything you need to get started, plops you into a mission, and says, right, go do this. Whereas Ambition mode, you've got all this freedom to do stuff. It's a completely different kind of freedom to what you've got in Adventure mode in Hyrule Warriors, though. So, looking forward to getting stuck into that at some point. But I'm having a lot of fun with the story mode so far. So really satisfying mechanics. You've got this interesting EX weapon system, it's called, that I believe was introduced in Dynasty Warriors 7. And so what this does is each character can wield 2 weapons and switch between them during battle. They have one weapon from the selection that is called their EX weapon, which is generally their iconic weapon from the series. So, for example, Sun Shang has the wheel blades that she always uses. Mm-hmm. That's her EX weapon. But at the same time, she can also wield any other weapon if you want her to as well. Each of the weapons has one of 3 elements. They are man, heaven, or earth elements, and those are weak or strong against various things in a triangular arrangement. When you meet an officer who has a weapon that is weak against yours, you get a weak point gauge, a bit like you do in Hyrule Warriors. So you batter that down, and then you do a big special attack on them when that's depleted. When there's ones that are strong against yours, there's certain skills you can only unlock by defeating enemies that have a weapon that is stronger against yours. So there's kind of incentive to experiment and challenge yourself a bit around the place as well. So yeah, a ton to it. Lots of characters to unlock and level. The presentation's really nice. The story scenes look really cool. There's a lot of good humour in it as well, which is something I think the Warrior series is kind of started to latch onto as it's progressed through.
I think it has to.
Yeah,
it's been retelling the same story so much over and over for like the past 20 years that it's like they've really got to like explore not taking it seriously in order to have fun with it in new ways, because it's the same story. Every Dynasty Warriors is the same story. They've been telling the same battles. You know, you can only take down the Yellow Turban Rebellion so many times before they need to throw some other wrinkles in there, right? And I think a little bit of self-referential humor is probably the best way to do that.
Yeah. And they handle it quite nicely. So it's not as if it's sort of taking the piss out of what is going on. The sort of overarching story is still handled on like the overview map, and it's saying, oh, so and so did this, so and so betrayed this person, and so on. But then the humor and stuff tends to come at the personal level. So in these sort of pre-battle cutscenes, you'll get the various officers interacting with one another, and so like the example I gave you the other day was one of the characters showed up to a stealth mission with massive bells on his trousers, for example, and there's like this whole exchange with them while they're hiding in a bush. It's like, did you have to come out here with those bells on your trousers? It's ridiculous. And they end up arguing so loudly that they alert the whole base they're supposed to be attacking, and that sort of thing. So yeah, so a lot of fun there. Again, I'm writing a series of articles about that as I explore the various elements of that over on MoeGamer. So again, check into that as I proceed through that. Oh, I did want to say, just back to Ace Combat for a moment as well. I'm going to try and check out the whole series because I've now got all of them except the PSP games, I think. So
how many of them were there on the PSP?
There were two, I think. There's one that's definitely in Strange Reel, and I think there's one that isn't.
Okay. So this one.
Assault Horizon was alright. Assault Horizon was actually my first Ace Combat game, and it made me want to play the other one. So Assault Horizon has its values, as I will talk about when we revisit that at some point in the future. Finally then, the other thing I've been playing is 428 Shibuya Scramble, which is going to be the next cover game feature on MoeGamer.net. So this is a visual novel by Spike Chunsoft. This was originally released in, I think, 2008 on Wii, and it was then ported to a couple of other systems, and it came west for the first time last year, I think. Either last year or the year before. I think it was last year. And yeah, it's a super cool game in that it's a visual novel that makes use of still photographs and live action video rather than hand-drawn artwork. And its main gimmick is that there are 5 parallel storylines going on between these different characters. So there's an overarching plot where they all sort of cross over and various things happen. But each of these characters also has their own narrative path to follow as well. And each one has a very different character to it as well. So, for example, there's one of the characters is a cop. So his story is very much a sort of hard-boiled cop drama. There is a character who is stuck in a cat mascot costume that is very sort of slapstick humour. There's a guy who's in charge of a can't speak today, drugs company. And his is very sort of psychological horror. There is a newspaper reporter who is sort of covering most of the events that are happening to the other characters from the outside. And then there's a guy who's like a street punk turned environmentalist who is sort of gets wrapped up in all the action from the other stuff almost by accident. So, but yeah, it's really interesting from a narrative perspective for that, but also because of the way it uses its mechanics as well. The visual novels aren't known for having a lot of mechanics in them, but the structure of Shibuya Scramble is such that the choices you make in one character's path will almost certainly affect one of the other characters. And so you'll get into a situation where like one of the characters will be on the street and they'll run into some other side characters, and they might, I don't know, ask for directions or something, and like if you encounter that first, you don't know the context of why they're asking for directions. So you might well tell them the truth, tell them where they're supposed to be going. But then you get to another character's thing, and you find that these people who you gave directions to earlier on were actually trying to kill someone else. So you then have to go back, change that choice, and change the consequences of that, which will then allow the other character to proceed down their timeline without getting killed or whatever. So
I like the sound of this.
Yeah, there's a lot of really sort of each time block in the game. It's split into hour-long time blocks, and you have to clear all 5 characters' time blocks to proceed to the next one. Each one of those time blocks is basically a sort of really intertwining puzzle of figuring out which choices are dependent on which other ones, and how the characters relate to each other. And as you progress further, it starts giving you more and more vague hints every time you reach a bad end. And so it sort of suggests what you might want to do, but it doesn't necessarily tell you which character it involves. So you have to figure out things from that sort of perspective as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting puzzle, as well as telling a really cool story as well. So
this sounds great.
Yeah, so it's a very well-known title in Spike Chunsoft's back catalogue as well. It's one of their series that they used to call sound novels, which is a phrase I've heard before, but I wasn't really familiar what it meant until recently. But sound novels was apparently a brand that Spike Chunsoft did a while back, but it's been kind of it's got more sort of broad application now. And a sound novel is basically a visual novel that tends not to include speech in it. So there's no speech in Shibuya Scramble, it's all text. But it places a very strong focus on creating atmosphere through sound.
Okay.
And so as you go through, there's sort of very strong use of music throughout it, and also a lot of ambient sound as well. So along with these beautiful high resolution photographs that depict most of the action, you've also got sort of the ambient sound of where you are and the people wandering around, and just like subtle things like when the story's inside a building, you'll sort of hear things like the lights buzzing and stuff like that. So there's a very strong focus on that side of things as well, and it's not something you necessarily actively think about while you're playing it, but if it wasn't there, you'd really miss it, certainly.
Well, it's immersive, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
That's something that's missing from games, really, in terms of creating an immersive feeling of being in a place, is ambient sound.
Yeah.
And it's something that's often ignored.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm probably about a third of the way through that in a minute so far at the time of recording. So I'm going to be continuing to play that over the course of the next month or so, and writing up some thoughts on that on MoeGamer starting from this week by the time you hear this. So watch out for that. And that's about it for the minute. So aside from the stuff that I am also covering every week on my YouTube channel, but I won't go through all that because there's quite a lot of it now. So just check that
machine, man. It's unbelievable.
Just check that out if you want to find out a bit more. So, are we done now?
I think so.
I think we are. All right. Okay, let's take a short break, and then we shall say something very controversial.
Dun, dun,
all right.
dun.
See you in a moment. Welcome back. Now, it's time for our main discussion of the episodes, and our talking point for today is Death to Metroidvania!
Kill it.
Kill it. Now, so, we would like to clarify at this point that we are not saying we would like to kill the genre of games that people tend to refer to as Metroidvania.
No,
However,
I like them.
Yes.
Very much.
Yes, we both like them very much. However, we would like to very much dispatch with the term Metroidvania. Now, I know you feel particularly strongly about this, Chris, so why don't you launch into why this bothers you?
Okay, yes. This is something that I spend way too much time thinking about. I mentioned it once or twice on previous episodes, but my background in terms of education is actually in basically media criticism. So I have a master's degree in popular culture studies, which is directed toward kind of understanding popular culture artifacts. So things like movies, television, music, comic books, basically everything that's not considered quote unquote fine art.
Yes.
And learning about them and building kind of ways we can think about these things as cultural artifacts and understand that as people, even though these things aren't typically considered fine art, they're a very important part of our cultural history, because what we consume for entertainment defines us as people. So my specific field of expertise in the field of popular culture study is genre study, which is kind of understanding basically the way we name, categorize, define, and compartmentalize the different types of media we consume. My specific field of study when I was working on my master's degree was in film, and so I did a lot of my study looking at kind of the superhero film genre specifically, and how it had evolved through the ages and the years, and how do we define a superhero movie? What are the things we're looking for? So when I think about gaming, my head often goes into this space because it's something I've spent so much time of my life looking at and understanding. So I tend to get really, really agitated when I don't like some of the terminology that we use to describe certain genres. And the one that pisses me off the most is Metroidvania. The reason Metroidvania is something I don't like is that in genre studies, what we want to do is, when we name a genre or we come up with a title for a category of something, we want that title or that label to communicate basic information about that thing almost instantly.
Yeah.
And we don't want that label to require a person who comes across it to have a very fine degree of internal knowledge about that thing already. We want it to serve as kind of an entry point. So I take a lot of issue with using the term Metroidvania as a genre label, because it requires the person who comes across that term to A, have a very open mind because it sounds stupid, B, it requires them to understand a great deal about Castlevania, a great deal about Metroid, and to understand what Castlevania and Metroid mean, to understand that not all Castlevanias are necessarily open-ended, and to understand that we're only talking about the Castlevanias that are open-ended and Metroid, and to understand that the game we're talking about has qualities of both some Castlevanias and Metroid. Take all that information, pack that up, and then use that information to think about this new game they're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, in the gaming community, we tend to really, really enjoy labels like that, because it takes a lot of knowledge in a very concise way, gives it to us, and we recognize it, because we know what Castlevania is, we know what Metroid is. But really, not everyone does. Not every game where you're going to come across in your lifetime has played Castlevania or Metroid extensively.
Yeah.
So the example I give, which kind of I take things out of gaming, right? Because as gamers, we're a very insular community, and we have our own vocabulary, and we have this assumed knowledge, right? Part of my biggest gripe that I just described with Metroidvania is it's exclusionary because there's a lot of assumed knowledge there. And someone who doesn't have that knowledge can gain no real insight from a game from the label Metroidvania. So the example I always give to people is, if you look at films, right, we don't name genres of film based on noteworthy entries in that genre.
Yeah.
It would be backwards. So I really like Western films. I like to write about them. I like to examine and talk about them. We call Western films because they are a type of movie set in the American Wild West. Yeah. That's the label we've come up with. We don't call them, what did I write down? Great train robbery stagecoaches.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to a Great Train Robbery Stagecoach Film Festival.
Yeah.
Like, you see how silly that sounds almost instantly. So, like, I love RPGs. We all love RPGs. We don't call RPGs Dragon Quest Ultimas.
We do call some of them roguelikes.
Yes, that's true. And I'm not really into roguelike either, based on this same knowledge, right? But in other genres, it's not common to do this.
Yes.
I mean, not other genres. I'm sorry. Other types of popular culture. It's not common to do this. We don't call all rock and roll like Beatles Elvis.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not an intelligent or informative way to label a category.
Yeah. I think another thing that's worth bringing up is actually something we had penciled in to have another discussion on another podcast, but I think it's relevant here as well, is that when we're talking about gaming genres, there's something fairly key that we tend to handle a bit differently to other media, which is that gaming genres, we tend to focus on the mechanical aspects of them and how they're produced and that sort of thing, whereas when you're looking at film or books or that sort of thing, you tend to focusing more on the artistic side of things, the narrative aspect or the thematic content of them as well.
It's true.
I mean, you can, to a certain extent, sort of combine the two a bit in gaming. So, for example, when people were talking about Red Dead Redemption 2, they would describe it as a Western game, but they'd also describe it as an open-world game or a Rockstar game or something like that. And I think sort of describing stuff as shoot-em-ups, as first-person shooters, as platform games, as Metroidvanias, as roguelikes, as that sort of thing is much more common than people talking about sort of artistic, thematic, narrative content in terms of genre as well. And I think that's something that is, now that we're getting pretty good at telling stories with games, it's something that I think people need to sort of look at a bit closer.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. We hyphenate, right?
Yeah.
So Red Dead Redemption is an open world action adventure game that is a Western.
Yes.
but like, going, all that kind of plays very hand in hand into kind of my major complaints with using Metroidvania as a label. So unique to gaming is that we tend to use our genre labels to describe mechanical aspects of that title.
Yes.
So Metroidvania doesn't describe mechanical aspects of the title necessarily. It just says this is like these other games. Now, the extension of that is, of course, this is like these other games mechanically, but I would rather we utilize a label that openly describes those mechanics. A belt-scrolling beat-em-up openly describes the way that game plays. A shoot-em-up actively describes the way that game plays with terminology that's not necessarily exclusive and requires a great deal of prior knowledge.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, I propose that we call Metroidvanias, what I like to call them is open structure 2D platformers.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't roll off the tongue as nicely as Metroidvania, and I think that's part of the reason Metroidvania stuck.
Yes.
It's because
absolutely.
it's catchy, it's a buzzword.
Yeah. But at the same time, there are some other fairly clunky genre descriptors out there. I mean, like open world game isn't necessarily particularly... It's not a very sort of necessarily memorable phrase by itself, but it's been used so much by this point that people have become used to it. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it works as a phrase. I tend to use open world 2D platformer to describe Metroidvanias for much the same reasons as you're describing there. So, yeah, I think one thing that is often forgotten in this discussion as well is that stuff like Metroid and Castlevania weren't necessarily where this stuff started even as well. And so
that's part of the issue I have with it is why have we decided that Metroid and Castlevania are the two games?
Yeah. So, I mean, people who know me well know that my background is in gaming terms is sort of with European home computers. I got into home computing long before I got into games consoles and things. And if you look back to sort of the early to mid 80s, and look at games available for platforms like the Atari 8-bit, the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, particularly the ZX Spectrum, as it happens, is relevant to what we're talking about here. And games that were typically described at the time as just action adventures are pretty much what we now know as Metroidvanias. And so if we think of an action adventure from the ZX Spectrum era, probably the most iconic one is Jet Set Willy. Jet Set Willy is a game that pretty much hits most of the notes that we talk about when we talk about Metroidvanias these days, in that you've got an open structure map that unfolds from a 2D perspective. It's a platform game. You collect items, you avoid things. There's various sort of prerequisites for getting into different areas of the house according to the actions that you take. And yeah, that game, which was very, very influential over here in Europe, is not very well known in the rest of the world. And yet, I will have to check the actual dates on it, but I'm pretty sure it may have predated Metroid. I'm just going to actually look that up now, so I'm not spouting complete nonsense. Jet Set Willy came out in 1984. When did Metroid come out? Metroid came out in 1986. So yeah, Jet Set Willy predates Metroid by 2 years. And it was doing a lot of the things that we now know for that genre beforehand. It was a very influential example in early game development. A lot of people tried to emulate the success of Jet Set Willy with their own action-adventure games, open structure platform games, and that sort of thing. To such a degree that, like I say, we had a genre term for it at the time, which has changed meaning over time. The word action-adventure, everyone knew what you were talking about in the early 80s because it was this kind of game. It was this kind of game where you could explore from a 2D perspective. You could jump on things, you could avoid enemies, you could maybe get weapons, items, upgrades, all that sort of thing. And there were a lot of those games around at the time. So, yeah, it's just nice to acknowledge some stuff that isn't necessarily talked about quite so much when we use a term like Metroidvania.
Yeah, like I said, it's exclusionary. It's exclusionary, and it takes away attention from some of the other titles that have contributed to developing it as a genre and as a mechanical style.
Yes.
You know, I harp on Wonder Boy a lot when we play, but I really get angry when people talk about the Shantae series as a Metroidvania, because structurally and mechanically, the Shantae games don't feel anything like Metroid or Castlevania. They feel like Wonder Boy.
Yeah.
But are we really going to describe Wonder Boy as a Metroidvania? Because Wonder Boy ran pretty parallel with, like, you know, the original Wonder Boy in the arcades was experimenting with these open levels, larger levels with items for progress fairly early. You know, Dragon's Trap on the Master System was, you know, it did come out after Metroid and Castlevania 2, but it was right along there developing some of the hallmarks of the genre. So... yeah. When we do that from a historical perspective, it's almost reductionist to take away power from some of these other titles that have been huge. Falcom back in the day with Faxanadu was tremendous. Clunky and extremely difficult, but also an example of this kind of game with a huge, ambitious open structure.
Well, I mean, there's even like a case for citing stuff like Zelda 2 as well, isn't there? Like Zelda 2 has got very much this sort of element going on as well with exploring 2D levels, and I know it's got the 2D overworld map as well, but you spend a significant proportion of time in Zelda 2 doing platforming and making sure you have the right items to get past certain areas and all that sort of thing as well. So, but no one ever describes these as Zelda-likes.
Well, yeah, that's one of the points I wanted to make too. Really, what we talk about in these games is a game that transcribes the mechanics of Zelda to a 2D platformer.
Yes.
If you boil down the mechanical hooks that you define a quote-unquote Metroidvania with, it's basically a game that has transcribed Zelda to a 2D side-scroller. Think about all the things that define Zelda, the original Zelda to you. An open world that you can explore, items that you find that increase your abilities and then therefore enhance your ability to progress further in that open world, the ability to backtrack if you want to. It's these are the things we consider when we consider this genre.
Yeah.
So, like, going on from that, what are the bullet points that you consider to be necessary or defining hallmarks of a quote-unquote open structure 2D platformer. For me, the biggest thing is obviously the open structure that allows you to backtrack.
Yes.
And encourages you to do so as well.
Yes.
One of the reasons in recent history I've become so kind of agitated by this was Dead Cells.
Yeah.
A lot of people have been calling Dead Cells a Metroidvania.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I couldn't disagree more, because Dead Cells has contained levels.
Yes, absolutely.
You cannot go back in Dead Cells. And so I get really mad when people start throwing the Metroidvania label around on titles that possess certain aspects, but not the key aspects. So in Dead Cells, the levels are large and explorable, but you cannot go back to previous levels in a run. And that's a problem, because that's the open structure is one of the most defining characteristics of these types of games. Back in the day, one of the most popular examples I can think of are games that came out of the Euro scene. Games like Turrican.
Yeah.
Turrican had large, explorable levels, but each level was a contained level. We don't ever refer to Turrican in the lexicon of Metroidvania-style games, because we acknowledge that it had contained levels, and each level was a unique stage that did not allow you to backtrack.
Yeah.
So large explorability is not necessarily the only hallmark. It's the openness and the ability to return and transition between areas that really define this for me.
Yeah. I think that is definitely one of the most important things there. And like going right back to Jet Set Willy, like we described, that was a key part of that as well. So a lot of those early action adventures on the early 8-bit computers, a key part of them was, as you were exploring, you might see part of the room that you're in that you can't get to. And it's sort of like one of the main puzzles in the game would be figuring out how you get from the bit of the room you're in now to the bit of the room you can see but can't reach. And very often that's a sort of long and convoluted process that involves exploration and so on. I think that's, for me, that's always been a key part of the genre as well, sort of right up until sort of more recent games. Like if we think of, like, Castlevania does this quite a lot as well. It will sort of put a power up on the other side of a wall, and there's seemingly no way to get through that wall. You have to find a long way around it and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's quite an important part of it. A lot of people cite sort of the necessity for areas to be gated off by items as an important part of this type of genre. I don't necessarily think that's an essential part of it, but I think that is one way that these games can provide a bit of structure to the experience. So it's not necessarily something that is absolutely 100% needed, but it helps direct people through the experience a bit more. I mean, if you provide someone with a completely open world and tell them to just figure it out for yourself, a lot of people are going to get daunted and frustrated because they don't know where to go or where they're supposed to go or what the right order to do things in. It may be that there isn't a right order to do things in, but yeah, when you have like the structure like something like Symphony of the Night does, where as you go through you're gradually defeating bosses, unlocking new abilities and that sort of thing, that works for me, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily essential to the experience.
Yeah, and for me, all that kind of ties into it's like part and parcel of something that is essential to the experience to me, which is some form of character progression.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be like in Symphony of the Night, we had RPG character progression, experience, levels, stats. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about, but some type of character progression. It could be in the form of items. It could be in the form of abilities. It could be in the form of simply power, like gating areas off because the enemies are too strong here.
Yes.
And you have to come back when you're more powerful later. But I do think some kind of gating that's tied to character progression is really important to this genre. Because I don't think... I've had this argument with friends many times before in regards to open world games, is that you don't really want a truly open world game.
No.
You don't want a game where you can just go anywhere, do anything at any time, because that's called real life and it's not satisfying. Like, the games are inherently satisfying because they provide you a structure to perform within.
Yes.
So by having some kind of gating tied to character progression, it's what keeps these games interesting and intriguing from a mechanical perspective, because it sets goals for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's essential. But what's not essential is the form it takes.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that to me is what makes these games up. An open structure that allows and indeed encourages backtracking and exploration, and whether it takes the form of items, abilities, RPG-style leveling, some form of character progression that acts as a hand-holding device that gradually guides you through where you're to go and what you are to do in this world.
Yeah. I think the Shantae games are actually quite a good example of this.
Yeah, they're one of the best. Because
you've got sort of two real means of progression in Shantae. One of which is technically optional. So in Shantae, the optional one is... In fact, there's 3 in the original game if we're being picky. So, in the original Shantae, the Game Boy Color version, we've got you've got heart containers. So you can gain power by finding heart containers. Most of those are well off the beaten track. It's not like a Zelda game where you get a heart container for finishing a dungeon. In Shantae, you really have to work to find those additional heart containers and increase your maximum life. So that side of things is encouraging you to explore, to look outside of the sort of well-trodden path that you need to just complete the game. The second thing Shantae has got is the abilities that you do unlock by completing the dungeons, which is the various transformations and dances, and those are the means that things are actually physically gated to you. So you need the elephant to smash blocks, you need the harpy to fly over certain things, and so on. And then also in Shantae, you've got smaller things like the warp squids that you find in there, which allow you to quickly travel back and forth. Again, they're not essential to the experience, but they do provide incentive to explore places you might not go normally, and they help you to get around a bit more easily, which in turn gives you the incentive to sort of go a bit further afield, because you know you'll always be able to get back safely. So yeah, Shantae is a really good example over the years, particularly the first 3 games. Half Genie Hero Half Genie Hero played with its structure a bit more and it sort of took quite a different structure to the other games as well. It's still got a sense of character progression, but because of the different design of the game's overall structure, it feels slightly different. And I almost wouldn't necessarily describe that in the same genre as what we're talking about here, really, just because of the way that is split into more discrete levels. They're levels that you can revisit, certainly, but not in the same interconnected way as we're describing with Pirate's Curse, Risky's Revenge, and the original one. So
I do consider Pirate's Curse part of this, though, because Pirate's Curse is self-contained levels.
Yes,
but you can always return to them. So
yes.
Like it's not relevant to me that the world necessarily be designed as one cohesive world. But the openness of that structure to be able to return to those stages is important to me.
Yes.
But Half Genie Heroes levels didn't feel like open structure. They were more just like levels. Like there wasn't as much exploration to be had.
Yeah, well, Half Genie Heroes levels were very much, you start at the left, make your way to the right. I mean, yes, it was a very indirect route in a lot of cases, but it was very much a case of you go through the first area of this level, then the second area of this level, then the third area of this level, then you fight a boss. Whereas if we look at something like Pirate's Curse, that is very much more exploration based. It wasn't a sort of linear progression through a series of sub-stages. It was exploring the different routes you could take, finding things that you maybe needed to come back later for with different items and abilities and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the key distinction there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, not to discount Half Genie Hero, it's a fantastic game.
Oh no, it's a wonderful game.
But it's structurally not part of this overview we're looking at here.
Yes.
And intentionally so. They made it clear that they were not trying to make that kind of game this time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, that's all I really had about this. I wish we as a community could move towards using labels for genres, not just this one, but other genres too, that provide information about the mechanical structures of the game in the description instead of simply referencing other titles and requiring that prior knowledge. I would rather the labels we use be more informative.
Yes. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I'd agree with that entirely. I think there's a lot of work that people who want to comment on games, whether it's as professional critics or just people who are blogging about them or just chatting about them on Twitter, I think we're at a stage now with gaming where we need to expand our vocabulary a bit, and we need to be able to talk about things without just saying, oh, this is like so and so. We need to get better at describing things. We need to get better at talking about genre. We need to acknowledge that the sort of different appeal elements of games, like some people will specifically come to a game because the thematic elements of it appeal to them rather than the mechanical elements. Like if we take visual novels as an example, it's very rare you find someone who just likes visual novels. Because largely because visual novels have so few in the way of mechanics in most cases like Shibuya Scramble accepted, of course, that there is no one who is just into visual novels. You get people who like romantic visual novels, you get people who like eroge, you get people who like nukige, you get people who like games that have got visual novels that have got actual gameplay elements to them as well, like strategic elements or something like that. So I always
find this kind of discussion funny too, like anime. Like I love anime, but that's such a dumb, like when I meet people who like anime, it's like, okay, yes, that's like saying like I like TV shows. Yeah, because
I like books.
Yeah, like I like anime. Okay, great. Well, then I'm gonna assume you like those shows about pretty figure skating boys. like no, it doesn't mean shit to like anime. Like, I like giant robot anime. I like 90s action anime. Like, just because I like anime doesn't mean I want to watch Precure all day. Yeah. Well, it kind of does. But you know what I mean? It's like saying I like music. I like TV shows. Yeah. Like.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about it, even like the term gamer falls foul of this, doesn't it?
It's like, it's the worst.
I'm a gamer. I play games. I know this is rich from me coming through the site that has gamer in the title, but...
Yeah, but it's MoeGamer. You play Moe games. It's very specific.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is definitely something that everyone needs to work on a bit, I think. I mean, I say need, that's very authoritative, isn't it? But I think in order for sort of discussion of stuff to kind of reach a new level and for us to be able to comment on things with more knowledge and be able to look back on stuff more effectively, we definitely need to develop our vocabulary a bit. And
if we're serious about treating this media form seriously and having others take it seriously, and this has always been my argument, is that we need to evolve the way we talk about them to more closely follow suit to the way people have began to talk about other popular culture artifacts.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of this way of thinking that we need to think about games in the same way we think about film. I think they're two totally different things. But what we can do is, from a historical standpoint, understand the way discussion about film has evolved and learn from those experiences and those movements in order to make our way of discussing and compartmentalizing the way we think about games clearer, concise, more intelligent, and more informative.
Yes.
Because we can't open up the field of gaming, a media of gaming, to be something that people take seriously as a cultural artifact until we can present ourselves in a way where we can discuss and elucidate on it in a better fashion.
Yeah.
And it's something I find severely lacking in a lot of modern games writing, is that games writing that's done today is really only relevant to people who are already enthusiastic about games.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of made it my mission to try to be an ambassador for them to people who may not always understand them.
Yes. This has actually been a discussion for a good few years now, but particularly with regard to the media. And I think the media has been continually experimenting with how best to handle this. And I think what we've got at the moment is a failed experiment to do with back in 2006, there was an article on Esquire.com called "The Lester Bangs of Video Games." And the reason I remember this article is not because I read it at the time, but because I remember there being a discussion on the One Up podcast that my brother was involved in at the time. This article came out and there was a lot of discussion over it. So the opening to this article goes, "There are still people in America who do not take video games seriously. These are the same people who question the relevance of hip-hop and assume newspapers will still exist in 25 years. It's hard to find an irrefutably accurate statistic for the economic value of the video game industry, but the best estimates seem to be around 28 billion. This was 2006, remember. As such, I'm not going to waste any space trying to convince people that gaming is important. If you're reading this column, I'm just going to assume that you believe video games in 2006 are the cultural equivalent of rock music in 1967, because that's more or less reality." And then it goes on to describe that games are a consequential force with meaning and that they reflect the worldviews and sensibilities of their audience. And they go on to talk about this guy, Lester Bangs, who I was not familiar with before this discussion came up. But it was all to do with sort of discussing games in a bit more of a cultural context and considering the things that make games unique. Like the idea of potentiality. So things always happen the same in films and books and that sort of media. But games have this unique aspect where things don't necessarily happen the same way. Whether that's because you take a different route through the story in a multi-route game, or if you just don't finish the game. If you just don't finish a game, does that mean the rest of the story didn't happen? And so what this guy in Esquire, Chuck Klosterman, wrote the original article, what he was arguing was that we needed to look a little bit more about games in this context, acknowledge them as a bit more of a cultural force, looking at the things that the unique things that they bring to the table and so on. And so someone from MIT, a guy called Henry Jenkins, he was quoted as part of this article. He says that aesthetic criticism exists in this industry, but only as arguments among gaming scholars and game creators. And the gaming industry suffers because of that. There's a very conservative element to gaming because absolutely everything is built around consumerism. Game designers are asking themselves questions about how a game should look and what it should do, but not about what the game is supposed to mean. And so the reason I say that modern games journalism is a failed experiment in this regard is I think that they've sort of taken this idea to heart, but they've kind of gone a bit too far, if you see what I mean. So we have all these articles about how Halo is representative of toxic masculinity and how God of War is awful because it's got big, muscly, hairy men in it or whatever. And I can see what they're trying to do, and I want to respect it, but I think there's just this sort of... At the moment, we've got this kind of air of authority from these things that is not so much saying, well, this is what this game might mean. There's a bit too much of the angle that is sort of, well, I think this game means this, and you're wrong if you don't believe that. There's less of a discussion and more of a sort of finger-pointing aspect to it. So I can see what modern games journalism is trying to do. I just don't think the way they're going about it at the moment is really working.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a discussion for kind of its own discussion for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
But essentially what's been done is that what's been done now with the way we talk about games is kind of an example of what I was just saying I would hope we don't do, which is we've, instead of learning from the way that discussion of film has evolved, what we've really just done is taken the tool set used for discussing film and applied it to games in a way that's not necessarily constructive.
Yes.
But that's, like I said, that's another hour. That's another, because this is what I studied for many years. So it's kind of a whole nother lecture.
Yes.
But we can do better. And better doesn't mean outrage and problematizing everything.
Yes.
But better means taking a more critical eye, better understanding, taking culture and history into account as part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think history is a very important one. I think that is very lacking in a lot of modern games writing. It's like not to blow my own trumpet too much, but whenever I write about something, I try to bear in mind the historical perspective of something, including the context in which it came out, what came before it, what the people worked on it did beforehand, and also how this thing looks today, because I found a lot of games over the last few years that, both from mechanical and narrative and structural perspectives, actually work a lot better today than when they first released, and that sort of thing is always really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that is one thing that is sort of missed a bit in a lot of modern discussions as well, especially when you look back at games that are sort of commonly regarded as, quote, crap. If you think of something that was reviewed badly back in the day, that as far as like Metacritic or whatever is concerned, that is always crap. People will not necessarily go back to it, except in very specific circumstances like Nier.
I was going to say Nier is the primary example, right?
Yeah. So Nier, fabulous game, wonderful game, art in gaming, absolutely. If people hadn't bothered to go back and look at that, if people hadn't bothered to sort of take a more modern critical eye to that, rather than just going on, oh, the graphics are drab, it's not very fun, from the original reviews, then yeah, we would have missed out on a real cultural phenomenon there.
One of the greatest games ever made.
Yeah.
Like Nier is like top 5 of all time for me.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one of the greatest games ever made.
Yes. And I've nearly got my wife playing it, so keep saying positive things. Just with the announcement of this new raid for Final Fantasy XIV, I've nearly got her playing Nier. So fingers crossed.
Do you really need to be there to wipe your wife's tears away when she starts playing?
I'm going to say we both spend most of our time being sad enough already. I don't know if I need to encourage that, but anyway, yes. So I think we've come to some good conclusions there, which is basically do better, everyone.
Yeah. Do better. Start calling Metroidvanias open structure or open world platformers. Even though I'll never do it, because Metroidvania is just a word that's in my head. So do as I say, not as I do. Classic dad quote.
Yeah.
But I'll try to do better to use it less frequently in the future.
Yeah. Well, I think the broader discussion there is an important one as well. Just think about the way that we're talking about games and how we can make that better and how we can sort of progress beyond what we've got now, because I feel like we're sort of almost stagnating a bit at the minute, and there's definite steps we can take to sort of improve the way we talk about games and analyse them and criticise them. So, as you say, there's a good hour more that we could go on about that plus. So, let's cut that there. Let's hold that discussion there. I think we've covered why we think that Metroidvania needs to die, and well, we hope at least some of you agree. So, as usual, then, would you like to tell people where to find you elsewhere on the internet?
Sure. MrGilderPixels.com, as well as on Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram as Mr. Gilder Pixels. That's MrGilderPixels. I'm going to be posting a piece I'm pretty proud of on Monday, so keep an eye out.
Excellent stuff. And as I said at the start, you can find me at MoeGamer.net, which is where most of my articles go up most weekdays. I've also got videos going up on my YouTube channel that you may well be watching this podcast on. Most of those are linked on MoeGamer.net as well, so check those out throughout the course of the week. You can also find my Atari-centric videos at atari-a-to-z.wordpress.com. Very soon to be coming to the end of the first cycle around the alphabet of my Atari 8-bit games. That's very exciting. I've actually seen the project through to a sort of conclusion. So
What's that like?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's very exciting. But yeah, that will be continuing after we get to Z. We'll be going back to A again and starting all over again. So please look forward to that. So, as always, thank you very much for watching and or listening, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. Be sure to check out MoeGamer.net for new articles on Japanese and Japanese-inspired video games, new and old, every weekday. Every month, MoeGamer features an in-depth exploration of an individual game or series as its cover game. So be sure to check the archives to see if your favourite has had a deep dive yet. If you'd like to support the site directly, please consider becoming a patron or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.